Honestly, I am not the guy to discuss top 100 trends and such. You can always find interesting pop music if you just look down. And to be honest, I don't really care for the consensus that this is a bad year because one genre sucked. I have my gripes with the early 2020 years, and it wasn't because my personal favorite genre was poo, especially in 2023. Because to me, 2025 is pretty good so far, especially for albums. I originally had plans to write this in February, then March, then April, and now I am writing this for June and July. If it comes out in August, then that means my plans for August got spoiled and I'm probably depressed. Here we go! If you watch this channel, first off, I'm sorry. Second, you probably remember the blockbuster year we had last year, and how it won't go away. I'm still reeling from the hundreds of songs I added to my main playlist from last year. I'm approachable. Damn! For the first 2 months of 2025, it did feel like that trend of exciting and fresh releases would continue. I mean, heavy metal was doing some amazing shit early on top of the prior 4 years of improvement metal has been having. I would point to Poppy's I Disagree and Converge's Blood Moon 1 as the catalyst that kicked this off, though you could see the seeds planted for this age as far back as 2016. Experimental music has been as great as ever, especially no wave. I think Swan's 2020 releases have been some of their best. New bands like Model Actress, Modern Alibi, Squid, Madao Mukhtar, not technically but you get my point, Little Sims, More Mother, and many more acts have really excelled this decade. There have been oddball bands like Turkoloopy, Everything, The Body, and Beach Bunny. While 2025 is nowhere near the peak, it has been pretty good thus far. Paleface Swiss is Cursed on Toxic Masculinity, Tulpa and Tunic's noise rock projects, Beach Bunny's debut EP on Loneliness for Women in This Modern Hellscape,
my best friends in New York City, and I wonder if we'll ever live again in the same place.
Model Actress's Temptation on Queerness, Coming Out of the Closet and Existing in a Limbo Between Both. Auto Heart's newest singles are excellent. Viagra Boys' Self-Title and Self-Loathing, Non-Existence, Drug Use, Filth and White Trash, and so much more. If I get to make a part 2, you will hear about those releases, but right now this video is for broader trends and takes. Pop music has been pretty lame and unmoving, provided you only look to the top. Indie and alternative this year has been fine. I can't really tell you much no, but I don't really tend to follow those trends. Indie and DIY tends to take care of itself, and alternative music has been in a strange place since 2009. All I can tell you is that art punk is still the main trend in alternative, which still shocks me given how wrong I was in the 2023 honorable mentions, calling that trend done. The main type of music that is really booming, however, is electronic hardcore, which we'll get into. That's the thesis, but if we're going to talk about music this year, we gotta talk about the recession of pop music. Not recession pop, that's a stupid name for a genre. Now, I started watching music development in 2021, late 2020, but I listened to albums as far back as 2018, and since I started observing, I've noticed that since 2021 that mainstream music has had a strange drought. I live in Denver, which I hate, but since around 2014 there's been a mild drought. Given that this area is technically a desert, I'm skeptical, but apparently we used to get a lot more rain in short bursts, less hot days, and also less people. When I started album surfing in 2021, I got burned out because of the barrage of releases, which is not nearly as much as I deal with in my experience snobbery now. However, there were periods of weeks where nothing of significance would release and I would get agitated. I didn't listen to much outside of my sheltered bubble like I do now, but that doesn't mean there wasn't any period of little releases. Through 2022 and 23, I noticed that a ton of releases I would find, especially during the drought, would just not be that interesting or had come out another year entirely. This happened so much in 2023, it was one of my biggest problems with it. I thought 2024 was a break from this, but having lived in a desert drought state, yeah, that tends to happen. Randomly, you get these superstorms which dump meters of hail into the river, and suddenly you have to divert your route home because the trail is flooded. And then the next day, the dam closes. This year for pop music reminds me of 2 years, 1980 and 1987. Let me explain. In 1975, disco, as a subgenre, exploded into popularity amid the Bee Gees' Saturday Night Fever. The music industry, by and large, milked the fuck out of this. It was absolutely everywhere. Every single major act in some way would be forced to produce some disco schlock, from Ringo Starr to the Carpenters all the way to Disco Duck. Which is funny because that song came out in 75, but it should have come out in 79. Anyway, paired with that was 2 decades of chaos and unrest. By 79, Americans had enough of constant chaos, paired with growing reactionary backlash to disco, lingering racist and homophobic attitudes towards the genre, cratering sales in the music industry, and the infamous Disco Demolition Night fronted by a reactionary provocateur. And you end up with disco cratering in 79, being written out of American pop music almost altogether by 1980. There was still some remnants of its death from the Bugles, Michael Jackson, and Funky Town, but for the most part, in the US, disco was a slur. In Europe and the rest of the world, the genre evolved into dancehall, reggae, house techno, rave, and a bunch of other subgenres. However, US pop music in 1980 was at a low point. 1980 is one of the infamous years in music, and you can see why if you look at the subpar releases, legacy releases, and the nostalgia recline. Paired with punk's retreat into the underground and later rise of hair metal, you can see why people don't like this year. However, what about 1987? Depending on who you ask, 1987 is one of the other infamous years in music, but like with this year, if you look anywhere besides pop music, you can find a lot of good stuff. In fact, 1987 is a lot more like 2008, where you can see the storm of an alternative revolution brewing. From punk culture seeping out and the non-fascists moving into more artsy music, the underground was pushing out pop punk and grunge for the next decade, college rock was starting to take hold, hip-hop was slowly moving towards the mainstream explosion with NWA. It's also important to note that 1987 is 3 years removed from its blockbuster year prior. As country music, Christian contemporary, and easy listening take over pop rock, hip-hop, dance pop, and all other genres in the mainstream, I suspect critics will see this year as a mishmash between 80 and 87, though if you look anywhere else, music has been pretty good outside of pop music, as I've said. However, it's hard to ignore that pop music this year has been kind of abysmal, at least for the biggest names, and it's not like pop fans have been normal about it. Chappell Roan's The Giver is actually one of my personal favorites this year, but I've seen fans hate it. It's a simple song about playing dress up, being able to present yourself in new ways, and way too many have cried wolf that isn't gay enough or whatever that means. Gaga released a legacy release with half great songs and half filler, and people ate that shit up even though half of it is crap. K-pop has had a horrible decline in quality as their musicians pump out garbage even the stans hate. And given how much fear pop snobs project onto K-pop stans, that should worry you. I've listened to some of the music and it is horrible. Maroon 5, Morgan Wallen, and Alex Warren have all surfaced with horribly generic projects. Drake's newest project was about as shit as everything else he releases, with one annoying piece of garbage that hasn't gone away. Kendrick Lamar's Luther is the only song left on the charts of mainstream hip-hop as pop culture completely rejects it. The major pop stars succeeding this year are former influencers like Addison Rae and Alex Warren, along with no-names like Tate McRae, Jesse Murph, and Jelly Roll. Oh my god, Jelly Roll. Jelly Roll will not go away.
The people's Jelly Roll.
It has been a terrible year for pop music, as the biggest songs suck, and the best songs go away in a snap. Bad Bunny didn't chart, but Benny Blanco sure had for a millisecond. Gracie Abrams had a brief snap in the pan before vanishing off. It's been bizarre. The most infuriating discourse I saw was with Benson Boone. There has been this never-ending argument about whether he deserves the hate. I threw my bone in the ring, but I didn't expect that he would be the only male pop star to succeed at all, and only one of his weakest songs. He shouldn't be the only one up there. He recently released an album that was actually good. I will not be surprised if it all collapses down. The only song to stay is the one that goes, please, a fucking car alarm. Poor Benson Boone's gonna become a one-hit wonder with his worst song. Poor guy. The only successful pop star this year was Sabrina Carpenter.
3.
Never mind. Carpenter isn't a bad artist, but I do not understand why she is the largest, besides the fact that the competition is Alicia Cara and Jesse fucking Murph. Even The Weeknd struggled on his album that could have had some cuts. Okay. Outside of that ecosystem, music has been interesting. Alternative and indie music has been in a weird, bumpy ride throughout. Certainly good, but I've not been sure what to make of it. The most significant release in my circle was Squid's Cowards. It was fine. I'm not huge on its slide into alternative rock from noise rock, nor its bad mixing or lackluster compositions. I like the writing, but an album about how fear drives people to hurt one another shouldn't sound so boring. The Wombats had their newest release about depression, self-loathing, and sarcasm. I don't wanna socialize unless I'm getting numb. With a couple catchy songs, but I can't stand that album's writing, mostly because writing's that self-loathing, but also projects it out and blames everyone else, stings my brain. You know, Pat the Bunny, Harley Poe, or that one atrocious Hobo Johnson album. You know, that shit makes me vomit. Though it hasn't been all bad. Panchico's newest album was good. Beach Bunny's debut was an excellent dive into women's loneliness after the pandemic. Bad Bunny's album was really unique and it mixed electronic music from its underground. I mainly heard Brazil. Modern Alipi's full LP was great with some catchy bops. The most interesting releases are from lo-fi punk. Yo's Legion, Jompy, Sven Johnson, Sincerely Yours, and The Weather Station have all been doing some extremely interesting things with little. Not all of those releases are perfect, but they've stuck in my head. My big highlight was from Zay Tonde, whose debut comedy album actually has this underlying plot from the narrator, and either his alter ego, demon, or even rival and slightly romantic chemistry between this weak thimble, ordinary schlub, and over-entitled superstar. The album is great and I highly recommend it. The strongest developments are in heavier music as a whole, which I have a lot of notes for. I want to shout out the albums from Tulpa and Tunic, both of which released really great noise rock projects. I still need to get to Indigo Drone and Low Hum, but I'm very backed up. Emotionally, that is, sexually too. There has been this slow development of electronic hardcore, elements of glitch, noise, electronic, and punk hardcore, since around 2014 when Machine Girl exploded with Wolf Girl. Surprisingly, this niche has only grown through hyperpop, drum and bass, breakcore, and most recently with hip-hop retreating to the low underground. Ada Rook's newest album about frustration in a world of hate and fury was sublime. Ethel Cain's Perverts was a dark exploration of hauntology through the angle of hatred society plants on women's sexual desires and pain. Unrelated, Ribs by Lord is about hauntology to me. NW3KD, though I will need to return to it, was a fantastic dark ambient album that sounds like someone with depression watching a bright world on the outside before finding a way out of the trap. How to Disappear Completely's Motionless Constant is weirdly really catchy, but also an ace album of weird electronics. Paleface Twist's Curse was an excellent exploration of anger, masculinity, and teenage angst. I've been liking my barrel of regulars like Louisong, Brazil 404, Getzer Shadim, How to Disappear Completely, tons of noise projects from new and old acts, and a ton of heavy metal, which itself is killing it this year. Clippings albums on Cyberpunk, The Body and Intensive Care's Brutal Dissection of Misery, Heartworm's great goth metal album, Dit's new no-wave album, not to be confused with the hardcore band Dit's, Whitechapel's brilliant sacrilegious album on corruption, Bloody Wood's follow-up, and their power anthems, Young Widow's album on taking back power from a corrupt system by essentially siphoning energy from it, wasting time, Rebecca Black's brilliant hyperpop release on Getting Over the Past, and the Parasocial Pup's breakup album of The Limbo After a Breakup, Backwash's album about surviving and processing survivors' guilt from it, Viagra Boy's new self-loathing mixture of dirt and grime, Car Seat Headrest's look at love and family, acknowledging where love was and where it wasn't, regret and expression, the music I made when I was afraid of dying's project of drone, pain, and despair, and looking back, Isbroki's new project on hate and rebellion, Swan's new album about life and watching the life that comes out of you become a person and the shock that comes with it, Billy Wood's album on the ever-present terror of a racist society and how it stalks your psyche, so much more. Fuck, this video is long. Of course, that can be for the second part if it ever happens, which I probably won't. There are also some residual releases from last year I found this year. Soft Play's last album, Violet Pony's EDM project, the deluxe of Big Special for that project I missed last year, and even some other stuff, but for the most part I like this. 2025 has been pretty good for albums, and that's how I judge music. There may be too much, and there have been quite a few stinkers, more than I remember. I judge years mostly by which list I want to do, or my impressions of it as a whole. If I want to do the best list, then I consider it a good year. If I want to do the worst list, I consider it a bad year. I'm very lukewarm about it. Or at least I was. Honestly, I don't want to do the worst list at all because of the music and it all sounds really shit and I don't want to talk about it. That's a bad sign. I don't really love talking about bad music. The strongest piece for music this year is songwriting. 2024 was an excellent year for music, but I think 2025 is killing it in the songwriting department.
I heard about the Titan going down to sea. They failed, but if you do it right, the concept's really slick.
Which now begs the question, what is going on? Why does this year feel so strange? We don't really tend to bring up year afters for blockbuster years. 1978, 1985, 1993, or 2010 aren't like significant years in music, maybe besides 67, I would say, because bad years tend to prelude major years and then everything kind of gets reset. After 2023 was atrocious and 2024 was amazing, we're now in the middle. 2025 isn't a development year for new artists to blossom, the gates are closed and most of the acts that are getting attention are established. It's also locked, like with 80 and 87, and a bit of an oddity regarding why is pop music this year so bad, while metal music like Harakiri for the Sky is fucking ruling. Since BTS hit the mainstream around 2017, the main driver of music fandom is stan culture, which I say that because stan culture is kinda gone. K-pop this year has been around, but the songs haven't really been impressive, including the stans. They haven't blown up either. I know this because the once loud, proud, and airplane to the ground crowd that was known to dox and destroy people for speaking ill of their faves have been open about how shit this newest age of K-pop is. And we all know, because the genre is no longer at the top but secured at a place, the labels are hashing out worse and worse music. We saw this when Cupid by 50/50 came out and they openly said they got a hit by making good music. Because K-pop doesn't have to do that anymore, shown by Maroon 5 getting a tiny late-age hit by collaborating with a K-pop act. I don't know. I've listened to a bit of this genre, including one album, and almost all of it sounds like the same saccharine and watered-down sound that Chris Brown does. Way too processed, poor writing, weak generic choruses, BTS crossed over with killer hooks and great compositions even at their weakest, and all of their solo careers sound identical. Why? Because stans grew up. These were once young teenagers who had brutal lives ahead of them or too much free time and spent that time rooting for idols who they saw themselves in. As teenagers, they treated the world like little because teenagers see themselves as above it, invincible, and then you grow up, watch your parents die, and recline to a world of waiting to die because the adult world is cruel, uncaring, and miserable. Stan culture stopped just in time for the conservative recession to hit as Gen Z men return to Christ and nothing music like Alex Warren. Stans are just not boosting their old acts, or worse, are moving into tradwife culture. Fuck tradwives, by the way. I don't care if this is a sexist statement, I hate tradwives. On top of that, pop stars had their massive peak in 2024, but the steam has run out of that locomotion. There's been this weird brewing backlash to the Lord Pop era, especially towards Dua Lipa, and being a snoot, I actually really like the Lord Pop era, and hey, it was still party pop. However, it does feel lazy because of the nostalgia cycle, and I can't imagine this generic hate will last, paired with the hyper-corporate way we talk about music, like the dogshit term recession pop. The Poptimist movement has kind of run out of steam because of its smaller roots going dry. After a pretty raving late 60s, 1970 began the slow decline in rock music towards easy listening and gospel, peaking with 1974's biggest hit, You Are the Light of My Life by Debbie Boone, and a song about Jesus, which, ask anyone who was alive at the time, it was unavoidable. 1980's biggest hits were mostly contemporary pop and rock songs disconnected from disco entirely. As with the loud, out and proud pop of the 2010s and early 2020s, we're now seeing the opposite since culture tends to sway back and forth between soft and punk. The only issue is that Gen Z constantly swings into extremes, so we either have the most ear-piercing bullshit you've ever heard or the most boring commercial you've ever heard. No in between, bitch. Except, this year, right before Morgan Sporgan ruined everything, we actually got a peep at a different number one. Sleep Token. With their post-metal album Even in Arcadia, which has actually been growing on me quite a lot. Which, to me, tells me this easy listening and Christian contemporary is less of a sign of a regressing culture and more of an attempt to find safety in chaos, or possibly just something new. If fucking Sleep Token are on the list and are immediately swept away after Morgan Worgan's crap takes over and refused back on, that tells me that music by and large is far more complex than I think us snoots are giving credit for. It also tells me there might be some corruption or fraud in Billboard and how they count this shit. The charts have not moved, and despite Morty Wardy's album bomb, I have not heard a song anywhere. At my job, with its annoying radio, I have heard all of Tones and I's new singles and even Sven Johnson's Howling at the Moon before I heard a single boring song. I had a road trip with my brother and sister. My sister played the music, and she played a lot of bro country, including Morrissey Warrissey. She did not play a single song from his new album. Go figure. Either you nubs are too busy looking at stocks or something else is a bit fraudulent. If there's one thing I can agree with dweebs on, it is that bad music this year is horrible. Worse than 2023. Worse than any year that I can remember. It is dreadful. I've mostly been running into it passively since I keep finding gold, but I took a plunge down the oil spill and oh my god. Sleep Theory, Morgan & Morgan, Magnolia Park, Playboy Cardi, and Arcade Fire have released some truly putrid bullshit. And it doesn't help either that even though it isn't the majority, it sticks in your head like a parasite. The bad singles like Manchild and Nokia have not helped. And that definitely gives off the impression of a bad year, but zoom out and you see a bit more complexity. Plus, as mainstream culture becomes more conservative, underground culture is not. I've been finding a lot of queer and furry albums and they look insane. Cringe, I would never listen to that. Compare that to the mainstream rod of Moron Waron and Alex Waron, and you have some... Okay. The worst album of all time is Morgan Spalter's I Am the Problem. An attempt to do what Swift did with Midnights fails because it's actually bait. Worst writing, worst mixing, worst singing, worst production, worst tropes and cliches, worst everything, worst fucking album of all goddamn time. It makes One Thing at a Time look like fucking Beethoven. Which does actually prove me true that as mainstream music simplifies and gets more boring, the underground has only gotten harder and harder, and once the mainstream gets bored of listening to bird vomit, they'll come running back for the cool stuff, like they always do. That doesn't mean everything in the den has been perfect. There have been some snot rags that have come my way, and there have been albums that are good and not amazing. Mixed bags, though. There is one thing to address. The rise of electronic hardcore genres like breakcore and electropunk have already been rising for years, but particularly amongst a more rebellious queer youth. A lot of strange outsider music with aggressive noise, glitch, hardcore, and electronic production paired with vicious screams about suffering under a terrifying and uncaring world. Uboa, Femtanil, Isproki, Black Dresses, Backwash, Undergex, and many others. And slowly over time, these experimental clusters have become the sound of the underground. There's been a real consequence to the rejection of all things woke, whatever that means. One of the reasons pop music is declining is that, paired with the constant surge of pricing, queer folks are bracing for impact. They're not going anywhere, but they're not coming out to play. They're trying to survive, and it seems a bit misguided for people to complain about the boredom when A, you can find good stuff if you look, and B, maybe music isn't the most important thing in the world. What is my point for 2025? Well, music is as music does. Trend-wise, it's looking good for albums, bad for pop music, not great for singles. I'm still waiting to see where it goes, but I'm so behind on everything I can't really tell you. All I'll tell you is that the mainstream's going to be really boring. It's going to be where the interesting stuff is. I didn't really touch on the one problem music specifically has, which is that there is a fucking ton of it. Almost way too much. Actually, definitely too much. I used to do this thing when I was bored where I'd scroll through Bandcamp and pick some albums to listen to later. I can't do that anymore. I just always have too much stuff. So if anything, I got my wish true that more people would talk about this stuff. I just don't have the time like I did when I was 17, during the pandemic. So, that kind of makes things a little harder, but, whatever. I'll take it. It's a minor problem at the end of the day. Let's just start from what I said in the last 2 years. Music is becoming increasingly corporate and consolidated. We're seeing the effects of that, but we're also seeing a bunch of other shit happening at the same time. Even though the pandemic blues are kinda over, we're still getting the effects of the flu. Mike the Snare's recently been doing journalism, actual journalism, which pisses me off because how am I supposed to hate on him if he's doing the right thing? But he made a video about people, contractors who basically make venues and all that, how venues are getting shut down, how these people aren't being taken care of, how everything isn't fucking working. And one of the things about that is we're also getting a huge influx of new music in the digital wave as opposed to the physical wave. As things become more expensive, people aren't going to buy albums, which is going to make it harder to fund bands, which is making it hard for bands to succeed. As labels continue to choke out whatever money they can, there's less places to escape them. Bandcamp is now too under that control. Pop music is the way it is for a variety of reasons. We're in a transition year like 1991, 90, 87, 80, you know what I mean. All those years had Christian music booms, but they're not remembered. A lot of the music was very bland for very specific reasons. In 1980, it was because disco being pulled off the charts, which we saw with this year as Christian music took over, as queer pop and party pop got taken off. And in 1990 and 1991, after the Cold War ended, there was a lot of optimism that led to very chintzy and, dare I even say, close-minded songs. The only exception I ever really saw to this is the hit song from Jars of Clay, which kind of also got integrated with the folk scene that was happening and sounded kind of grungy at the time, along with REM's Out of Time. That could have helped that slip through. 2008, the red jumpsuit apparatus kind of slipped through, but there was a lot of Christian music and post-grunge. That's not me saying that Christian music never crosses over or if it's never good. Most music is kind of Christian. It's just when it becomes a main trend, that's something to look for because it usually isn't. And yes, you can disconnect politics from it because here's the other thing. Politics does have a role in it. A lot of companies are dodging a lot of woke things because I don't know. So as a result of that, a lot of stuff that's being pushed is very bland and saccharine. Look at Benson Boone's biggest hit, with him being forced to be a one-hit wonder because all his other songs are apparently too interesting. All the big artists like Addison Rae and Jesse Murph are fucking boring and are going to go away in the next year. Interesting artists are being rejected outright, and they might even go away. I heard someone say the backlash to Chaperone is comparable to Britney Spears, and I hate to over dramatize it, but it's kind of true. And since Benson Boone is being on the defensive, you see what artists are going to look at that and where they're going to go because of it. Yes, you can take politics out of it, but people still look to politics to see where they have to belong. Controversy and controversial underground music has to struggle to be very real because everything is controversial now. The decline of K-pop is because of its corporatization and normalization, so there isn't interesting K-pop on the charts either. There's also this kind of sense of fraud with Billboard, with how they're just not allowing anything to chart or last, and the rules are constantly changing. But if there's one thing 87 made me realize, it's this. Trends don't boom. In 1991, when Smells Like Teen Spirit hit the number one, no one looked at that and thought, yeah, that's where music's going. It was just seen as like a odd thing. But here's the thing, the trend was already in motion from Pearl Jam. And because of Pearl Jam, the alternative revolution was already happening in the underground, and Nirvana brought it to the mainstream because music was so fucking boring. What do I think is going to do it? Sleep Token. I think Sleep Token is where we're going. Spacey, moody, lore-driven music that's more popular for external reasons than internal reasons. And speaking of that, we've been focusing a lot on how music is popular for very external reasons. Make sure my cat doesn't... Hi. And those external reasons are always very specific. But the problem with that is that mainstream art isn't art. It's a sell. It's trying to sell you something. The Morgan Wallen album is a sell. It's trying to sell other artists. It's trying to exchange business. It's boring. And we're seeing that with Sleep Token. The music's really good, but there's a lot of lore reasons, a lot of external debate reasons. That was seen also with Alex Warren. Sure, the music is whatever, but the big reason it's popular is that it's bland. It fits into a wedding or a church. And that can be said for Benson Boone. His big hit wasn't popular because people liked it, it's because they didn't. They had problems with the chorus. And because of that, music has become a product, and the only place where music is allowed to be musical is the underground. One of the reasons I'm not really touching on AI in this video is, quite frankly, while it had come up a few times, I just don't see it actually doing what it thinks it can do. I've encountered a bit of AI music. There are a few electro artists I encounter who kind of release every few months. I don't know if they're AI, I don't care. But you know AI when you see it. The artists tend to have very stock, basic album covers with very pretentious titles, and it'll probably evolve to be better, but I think AI music is more of an experiment. It's more like training wheels. I don't see it really taking over anything. It will take over the mainstream at some point, and that'll become a problem, but corporations were already trying to do that, and they've already been doing that. We had that with bubblegum music in the 70s. I don't really think it's going to cause much shift or change anywhere because, come on. Even at a certain point, I think the reaction to the Carter 6 kind of shows that you can try and you might succeed, but you're still limited by what people will actually listen to. And it turns out an AI-generated voice or a hologram is a gimmick and not something people will really come back for. We know why this is happening. I talked about it in 2023, 2024. There are very specific reasons, and with the kind of recline of stan culture, that is probably only going to keep going in this direction, where music's going to be more focused on aspects outside of the music. We're going to focus on mythology, on sale, on lore. We'll see where it goes, but these trends tend to last about 4 to 6 years, or if you're grunge, forever. But with the way things are, they're probably going to have to. The reaction to bad albums this year have been horribly negative. And I don't mean like the way negative it was last year with albums like the Kanye album. I mean like people fucking hate them. A sign of a bad album is if you go to a review and people agree with it. If you go to a review of an album and people agree with it, your album is dismal. I've made videos on albums I don't like that people do, and people come at me about it. If people aren't coming at the critic for it, it's a bad fucking sign. And I don't really know where music is going to go in the future to get out of it.